Clean Water Initiative program. And I have with me today Kaitlin Hayes and Nina Gage, who are agricultural water quality specialists with the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. And they're going to be providing an update on the required agricultural practice implementation. So thanks for joining us today. And we have a handful of folks online. For the people online, if you have questions, if you could just type them in to the computer via instant message, and that'll be helpful. I'll help to field those. Okay. And do you have a preference of whether questions are during the presentation or after?
I'm happy to answer questions as we go. There are some areas that if folks have questions and they want more detail on a certain area, it might be beneficial just to wait until the end if we want to dig in deeper into any of the sections. But feel free to ask, though.
Okay. All right. So we can go ahead and get started. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you for having us, Bethany. It's nice to see everyone. So Nina and I are here. We just started with the agency in March, working in the education and outreach component of the water quality program. And so we are here to talk to you about updates on RAP implementation. So this is just some of the sections that we're going to go through today related to the RAPs. And various components of those. So we'll kind of plug away as we go through. I assume that most people are familiar with the various language, but I just figured I'd include this list of acronyms as there are many in RAPs and water quality in general. Some of the ones that we'll be talking most about, RAPs, required ag practices, and then we have the CSSFO, MFO, and LFO, and those are just the different size farms that we interact with. So for the RAPs, when they came into effect, these are the different sections of the RAPs. So we're not going to spend this presentation going through and describing every single section of the RAPs because that's already happened. We're going to spend some time going through and talking about what's happened thus far, and it will end up touching upon most of these categories anyway, but just to give you a visual of what the RAPs cover, and first and foremost, it's to prohibit discharges into waters of the state. And then because of that, we are able to regulate and have an effect on all of the various components underneath that. So beginning with some of the effective dates of the RAPs, so the RAPs happened because of Act 64, and that Act 64, Vermont Clean Water Act, was enacted in June of 2015, and then the RAPs came into effect just over a year ago, in December of 2016. Some of the dates that are important to focus on are the Custom Applicator Certificate or Certification Program, and so that's for manure applicators all over the state, so they have to now be certified. And so there's various components of the certification program that we will talk about, Nina will talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But so the certification program officially began in March of 2017. In addition to that, there's a manure spreading ban, a winter spreading ban for all farms and custom applicators. And so that is applicable to everyone December 15th through April 1st. And again, there's some exceptions to that for folks that have fields that are located in floodplains. And also the Secretary does have some leniency in terms of if weather has impacted the field and they're too wet, either before or after the ban, it can be extended either direction. So the CSSFO, the Certified Small Farm Certification Program, began officially in July of 2017. We will talk more about that, and they have some requirements that they need to fulfill. But the program started in July of this year. So before July of 2017, there technically weren't any certified small farm operations. And then we have another part of the RAPs were tile drainage rules that are supposed to be going into effect in January of 2018, and we will talk a little bit more about that as well.
So one of the major programs involved in RAP implementation was the certification of custom applicators as required by Section 10 of the RAPs. So is everyone familiar with what a custom applicator is? There are custom croppers if you do cropping for people. Custom applicators applies to folks who are applying manure. So for instance, a farmer might require the services of a custom applicator to come to their farm with the equipment and spread manure on their cropland. So all folks who spread manure and charge for their services are required to be certified in the state of Vermont. We also have folks from New Hampshire who do spread in Vermont that are certified, will be certified. So last winter of 2017, there were 3 day-long trainings that folks attended to learn about minimizing risk when spreading manure. As per the REPs, they're required to have 8 hours of training over each 5-year period. They will pay an annual fee every year. This next week, actually, starting on Tuesday, we have the final training evaluation session. So folks will actually come in and take their examination and receive their certification. So we can give you an updated number after that. But we're expecting, based on participation in the trainings last winter, between 60 to 100 custom applicators to be certified across the state of Vermont. And we have 3 training evaluation sessions. Sorry about that. December 19th, 20th, and January 5th. We've been partnering with UVM Extension on the educational components of this program. And this is actually a picture from one of the trainings in Middlebury. We have seen, in my field experience this season, we've seen incredible success working with custom applicators. They're abiding by setbacks. They understand the setbacks. They understand the requirements as per the RAPs, sometimes even more than the farmers that they're working with. So you have an example on the next slide of a studied spreadback. So this is a ditch. You can see that the required buffer length is 10 feet. They're required to abide by that when spreading manure as well. Here's another example of surface water and a large setback. So it's 25 feet required setback, but this one is extra. And if you go to the next slide, there's a funny story about this. I was on a farm inspection up in the northern part of the state, and one of the sons of the farmer was there, and he was spreading manure while we were doing our inspection. He was very nervous, concerned, but he really wanted to show us that he'd gone out in the field and spray painted extra large setbacks of where to turn his manure tanker, and then went forth explaining how his methods of entering and exiting the field. So there's, folks are engaging in this conversation. They're cautious. They're, very careful about what they're doing and how they're doing their jobs. And secondly, they're proud of the knowledge that they've gained through this process, which is really great.
Great. So another component of the RAPs require that CSFOs, MFOs, and LFOs must obtain 4 hours of water quality training credits every 5 years. And so those credits can be acquired through many different events that are put on by UVM Extension, by the agency, by other state governmental entities, by many different folks. And so the requirements for that are that the events need to be approved by the secretary. So in order for the credits to count, the events need to have been submitted to the agency for approval 30 days before the happening of the event, and then we will approve it and send a sign-in sheet out to whoever's hosting the event so they can have it present at the event, the farmers sign in, and then they submit that form back to us, and we are tracking all of the different hours that farmers are spending learning about water quality. And so there's application form, and then it's approved, and then there's a sign-in. We are going to have awards for farmers, so there's going to be an annual award for who's attended the most water quality training hours, and then every 5-year cycle it restarts. So everyone has to get at least 4 every 5 years, but there'll be an award for whomever has the most after the 5-year cycle. So for the water quality credits, they need to fall under one of these categories in order to count. And so I'm not going to go through and read these out to you, but essentially it has to do with discharges, manure application, and just being thoughtful about how you're managing your fields and your land. So is this going to have a potential to run off into a water of the state Is the impending weather going to impact my spreading? Just all of these different thoughts that folks need to be thinking about as they take care of their fields. So the CSFO program was a brand new component to the agricultural regime in the state. So we have an estimated 700 to 800 CSFOs in Vermont, and that's from the farm censuses. So there's a threshold for the CSFOs, which I've listed out here. Most often folks associate that with having 50 or more cows. And it's anywhere from 50 to 200 cows, or 50 to 199 cows makes you a CSFO, 200 and up makes you MFO or LFO. So as of now, one of the criteria for a CSFO is you have to certify, and I'll go through those requirements in just a second. But so taking into account, I think I did 800 for this little pie chart here. So if we have 800 CSFOs, as of this point in time, we have just under 25% certified. So remember, this program didn't start until July of this year, and we already have a quarter of the farms certified, which is pretty impressive. Technically, the CSFO should all have their forms submitted to us by the end of January. January 31st is going to be their annual certification date. But as of now, we're still providing a lot of oh yeah, go ahead.
So the question here is certification is self-certification. The agency isn't going on these farms and inspecting. They're filling out the form online and sending it in.
Yes. Right. Yes, and so the inspection process, which I'll skip right to the next slide, is a different form of reaching compliance with the RAPs. So all the CSFOs have these 4 requirements they must fulfill in order to be compliant with the RAPs. And so this annual certification form is available online. You can fill it out, submit it online, or print it out and send it in. There's no fee associated with it at this point in time. Yes.
In addition to that, while we ask farms who believe they are required to certify, through messaging and ag review and direct mailings, our water quality inspectors are also going to visit farms that they believe that we have other knowledge through other agricultural programs, whether it's dairy inspection or meat inspection, that they house livestock. And through, the tactical basin planning priorities, they'll be visiting those farms first. So in a sense, we have 2 major pathways of determining who is a CSFO.
Right, and so what Nina's explaining is that CSFOs are going to get inspected by an agency official at least once every 7 years. And what Nina was saying is we have these priority areas that will be inspected first. And we will eventually, everyone will be inspected within the first 7 years, but that's how we're determining who we're going to inspect first. So we have annual certification that needs to be completed in January of every year. We have an inspection at least once every 7 years. All CSFOs now need to have an NRCS 590 standard nutrient management plan, which is required of MFOs and LFOs as well. These plans are complex and they take a lot of time to compile. And they contain a lot of information all about the farm, about record keeping, from manure applications to different information about your crop yields and soil health. And so they take a long time to put together. So the CSFOs will definitely be working on those plans for the up and coming years. And then the last part was what we had spoken about before, was the water quality training credits, which they need to get 4 credits every 5 years. These numbers at the bottom of the screen indicate farms that are covered under, or these numbers indicate all of what's covered by CSFOs, MFOs, and LFOs. So 93% of dairy cows are covered within, they are either a CSFO, an MFO, or an LFO. So that's a large part of the state that we have, that we interact with. We're checking the farms, we're just in touch with the farmers. And so that's quite impressive. It's a lot of area within the state, and it's a lot of the livestock.
So as Kaitlin was saying, CSFOs, Certified Small Farm Operators, you guys got that acronym yet? They're required once every 7 years to receive an inspection. MFOs, just to give you some comparison, we anticipate approximately 800 CSFOs. MFOs, I believe we're at
140-ish. Yep.
140 MFO farms. They get inspected once every 3 years, and LFOs are every year, but it's 699.
Yep, 600. So MFO is 200 to 699 cows, and 700 and above is LFO.
So those big farms are getting inspected every year. They have a yearly visit from one of our inspection staff. They go through a completed farm inspection of all of the facilities on the farm, as well as their cropland. So the process by which an inspection happens, they're going to go to the farm, they're going to do the inspection, they'll leave a summary report with the farmer, so the farmer has an understanding of where there might be issues on their farm. The inspector is going to go back and write reports. Those reports, if they have issues, will go through our enforcement team, but we developed a video for education around SFOs, because our CSFOs are farms that have not had regular inspections. They're not used to having the state involved with their operations. They're not used to having that type of communication. So last year a video was developed to give them an idea of what an inspection entails. So we're going to show you guys that video. Part of it. Let me make it big.
My name is Nate Sands. I am the Ag Water Quality Section Chief for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. I oversee the inspection staff for the agency regarding the water quality regulations. My background is in plant and soil science, as well as I have a brother that is a small dairy farmer in central New York. So I really enjoy going out to a farm, assessing their farm individually, because we acknowledge that each farm is different. And then from there, we can try to align resources so that farms can get help that they need to make any necessary corrective fixes. I'm here with Rob Achilles, who is the Chief Engineer for the Agency of Ag. Normally, the engineering staff is not with us during the inspections, but today he has come along to assist. Today we're conducting an inspection of a small farm operation under the required agricultural practices, which were passed in early December of 2016. Small farms that would require certification would be an operation that has 50 cows or more, for example, 50 acres of corn production, or 50 acres of vegetable production. So the agency understands that some projects may be very complex and take time. There are a host of technical service providers that can provide assistance to farms in developing a plan to help them achieve compliance. We contacted this farmer in advance of this visit so that we knew a time worked for them and they would be available on site with us. All right, I'll give you my card for contact information if you have any questions. So as we talked about on the phone briefly, we need to do a walk around of where you manage waste or feed, as well as any place that animals are housed. And then we have a few questions that sort of summarizes your operation so we can understand the management of the operation. And so there's a little bit of paper that we go through, as well as looking at the nutrient management plan and records. What our inspection basically entails is it's almost a four-part sort of inspection. We look at a nutrient management plan, we look at the production area of the farm, we look at field practices, and then we look at vegetated buffer zones between croplands and surface waters.
Well, let's start at the manure.
So as you can see, education has played a huge role in the first year of the RAP, implementation of the RAPs. We're working with a population of folks who may never have had a state worker on their property before. It's a huge barrier to get across culturally to say, we're here, this is what we're looking at. And we find that with most farms, they might be very hesitant at first, very nervous. As we go through the inspection process, they understand more about what we're looking at, why we're looking at it. And we use that opportunity to do some education around non-point source pollution. So by the end of the inspection, most farmers feel pretty okay about it. They're on board. They're willing to make some calls to get technical assistance and or financial assistance, depending on what's been discovered throughout the inspection process.
And just to be clear, so the formal inspection happens within these years, as we have indicated. But if there are other complaints that have happened that the public submits, or for some reason we have to, an agency staff member will go and do what's called an investigation to that complaint. No matter where it's coming from, they're anonymous. So we will often be on the farms more often than this, even just for a site visit or to answer questions. But so the formal inspections fall within these years.
So once an inspection report is written and or we get a complaint, an investigation report is written, it's reviewed by our enforcement team. Act 64 outlines the authority that we now currently have in enforcement. Summarized. That's all summarized there. There's a couple different things that can happen as a result of enforcement. You can go on our website and see the matrix as far as what might happen for what reason as far as enforcement. And then I think Caitlin's going to go over some of the numbers from this year.
So these are some numbers from just 2016 to 2017, and we might still get some additional numbers trickling in for 2017 if there were to be any additional complaints, especially with the manure spraying ban starting up so soon. And so inspections and investigations, you can see the comparison, and that's, I mean, the number difference there is just, there might have been less complaints. These numbers you can see at the bottom, so these numbers do not include any routine inspections. And so, I mean, if you think about, we're doing 1/7 of 700 to 800 CSFOs, we're doing 1/3 of 140 MFOs, and then all of the LFOs every year. So we do many, many routine inspections annually. We had a few more complaints this year than last year, and the compliance checkups, those numbers aren't too far apart. But I think one thing that is noticeable is the increased number of enforcement actions, and that's really been able to happen just because of increased personnel at the agency, being able to go to a farm or go to a complaint and have an investigation, and then be able to follow through and work with the farmer to try to fix whatever the issue might have been. And that's been a huge, it's quite a process for the farmer and for the agency, but those actions are what's going to help improve water quality throughout the state.
Were any of those the same farm?
I don't think we can give you that answer right at this second.
I think that would be interesting information.
Yeah, and the enforcement is definitely used as a tool towards compliance. That's our goal, as well as the goal of most people to improve water quality is compliance with the REPs. So one major section of the REPs that has impacted farmers in a pretty big way are the rules around floodplain management. Ned probably can tell you what a floodplain is. The specific type of floodplain that's called out in the REPs is a frequently flooded land area. So that is designated by the U.S. Soil Survey as a 2-year flood, or 1 in 2 chance of a flood event occurring in 1 year. So there are maps you can find online. So this is an example of an area that's considered frequently flooded. So what that means is if I'm a farmer and that's my land, 2 major questions. What am I growing there? Is it an annual crop, or is it hay or pasture land? If it is an annual crop, one major thing that's happened this year through implementation of the REPs is the requirement for cover cropping. So they are required to plant cover crops on their fields by October 1st if it's broadcast seeded, or by the 15th if it's drilled or otherwise incorporated. This is really a big deal. And so, for instance, this season we had a really wet spring. A lot of farmers couldn't get out on their fields to plant corn crops at a certain time period in which they would have liked to. So that brings them to the end of the season in which they are, they're watching their corn crop and they're saying, as soon as I get that corn crop off, I have to plant cover crop on this ground. This is now a requirement. But we did see some innovative responses this year. There were a lot of folks who signed up for aerial seeding, which was actually you fly a helicopter over the crop field and you disperse seed before the 1st because it's considered broadcast if it's aerial spread. The germination rates are not always super great for aerial seeding, but this year we saw exceptional rates. It was just the moisture level and the weather was perfect for it. The second huge thing with managing frequently flooded land areas is you have an extended manure spreading ban. So the normal manure spreading ban starts on December 15th. For these frequently flooded land areas, they starts on October 16th. So it's the day after you have definitely all your cover crops in. We've seen...
Does that include injecting?
Injection or drilled is by the 15th of October.
For manure spreading, injecting manure.
It includes all types of manure spreading. That's definitely, I think this year we saw a learning curve with that understanding. Some people played the card like I didn't know. Some people played like I don't have a choice. I went out on a few investigations myself for this specific reason. especially with small farms, we're taking this opportunity to sit down with them and walk them through all of this and why it matters, and give them some education and some resources so that they understand, this isn't just a rule that we plopped in there for some reason. Like, there are specific reasons why we do this. And the chance and risk of runoff coming from those fields that are right next to surface water and are frequently flooded is extremely high, and that is why these are here. So we're going to transition into talking a little bit about the variance processes that have been developed thus far. The frequently flooded is an example of one variance process that was developed. So I'll explain that farmers had the option to submit a variance. I believe we got 17 variance requests submitted. There's a couple of different reasons of which farmers might ask for a variance. One example of which is the U.S. Soil Survey, which designates a frequently flooded type of soil, are not all the most current information. So some, for instance, in Addison County were developed in the 1970s. So there are specific things that could have happened. For instance, a change in topography. There was a berm that was dug. So the chance of this land actually flooding has not flooded in 40 years. Some other examples are it's a pasture. It's a hay field. It's been a hay field for 20 years. It's never going to be anything other than a hay field. In which case, we're not going to require that they put cover crops on their hay field. We've also developed a variance for manure stacking site. An example of this is which stacking sites are required to be 100 feet from a property boundary. A good example of why a variance would be needed for this is, for instance, if a farmer has a piece of cropland and the railroad goes right through it. They technically own that land. It's technically a property boundary, but they might have a cornfield on either side of that railroad. And in which case, as interpreted, the REPs would mean your stack would have to be 100 feet from that railroad, which isn't necessarily a threat to water quality in any sort of way. If there's just a railroad there, there's no ditch, there's no surface water, we can say, okay, if you're 50 feet from where that railroad property boundary is, it's probably okay. Another example is roads are technically property boundaries, so if farmers own the land on either side of a class 4 road and it's all their cropland, we could potentially review if and approve or not approve their variance. Or a better example, two farmers are neighbors, one crop field next to another. They don't necessarily need to keep their manure stack 100 feet from that property boundary if there's no surface water or ditch. But if they get approval from their neighbor that it's okay, then we can approve that. And there's a lot more to do as far as developing variances. One that's in development right now is a nutrient management plan alternative for veggie growers. We're partnering with UVM Extension on the development of that, as well as we're working on site-specific buffers. We've piloted a few different tools to use for developing those. One is online software. Another is an assessment tool evaluating what types of land use are occurring next to the surface water or ditch that we are reviewing the buffer of.
Can I just share?
Yep.
Rob Evans sent a message. It says, State Floodplain Rule effective March 2015 regulates RAP development in regulatory floodplains mapped by FEMA and river corridors mapped by the Agency of Natural Resources. Largely applies to the construction of farm buildings and farm infrastructure.
Yeah, so that's different from the frequently flooded classification and how that impacts how farmers are managing their fields.
Okay.
Yeah. With variances?
So another big aspect of implementation of this non-point source pollution reduction rule is technical and financial assistance. So we have a variety of programs for farmers. The main one that you folks are probably familiar with is BMP, or the Best Management Practices Program. So last year, sorry, getting my notes. The BMP program identifies and assists in resolving risk of surface and groundwater contamination. In fiscal year 17, we spent over $1 million implementing BMPs on farms. They occurred on 29 different farms, and 79 water quality projects were implemented. Another big program that we run is called FAP. This one's been around for a while. It's called Farm Agronomic Practices. This is a program in which we We incentivize farmers to do things agronomically beneficial for their land. For instance, cover cropping, alternative manure application, manure injection, etc. In fiscal, or actually I'll talk about that in a second. Who is familiar with SEEP? This one's kind of a less familiar program, Capital Equipment Assistance. And Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. It's a federal program that we administer at the state for riparian buffer planting. So I'm just going to give an overview. As we were talking about before, there are new regulations around cover cropping. We administer a program called FAP. There are also programs through NRCS to get financial assistance for cover cropping. So this doesn't represent everything that's happening in the state. On top of that, farmers are going to do things on their own that are beneficial for their land. But it gives you a picture of what's happening. Last year, we had 24 recipients. This year, we tentatively have 58 grant recipients, more than double the acreage improved, and a lot more than what we budgeted as far as offering financial assistance for implementing cover crops. With that said, it's not all cover crops. This was fiscal year 2017. Alternative manure incorporation was another big category of acreage that was enrolled in the FIP program. And I just wanted to touch on SEEP. This is a program that we've run for a while, but just recently rejuvenated in a sense. There were some changes in the legislature last year. So with the changes in the legislature, basically it used to be a 50% cost share program up to $50,000 for equipment that improves water quality. That was changed to 90% cost share up to $300,000 with the inclusion of equipment for removal of phosphorus. So we rejuvenated the program, set some sideboards as far as what type of equipment folks could request and the funding cap. So for instance, we're not going to fund up to $300,000 if folks are buying a no-till grain drill or a no-till corn planter. We'll offer $10,000 assistance at 90% cost share for a no-till corn planter, or for instance, $40,000 up to 90% cost share for a no-till grain drill, because a no-till grain drill is going to be used to plant cover crops, and that's something we can guarantee. The $300,000 cap was left for phosphorus reduction or removal technologies. So we just got these in a week and a half ago about. We have more than $5 million ask as far as equipment, and 112 pieces of equipment requested. We had originally budgeted $1 million for this program, and the determinations as far as grant recipients have not yet been made, so I can't give you that information.
So does that impact other grants? So I know with NRCS there's a cap on money that can be acquired during a 5-year period during the Farm Bill. So if an applicant has received money from a BMP, does that impact the amount of money they could receive from this program?
Currently, no, but we do take past performance and capacity into an account when ranking. So one, do they have the capacity to provide the reporting materials that we require as far as where has this equipment been used, on how many acres, and for what purpose. Currently, we have caps in BMP, so if you're enrolled in the BMP program, but they are separate programs in the sense that you could apply for both and you could be approved for both depending on the quality of your application and proposal. So in addition to funding for farmers directly, we also fund excuse me, partners to work with us in the implementation of the RIPs. Excuse me. Sorry. You want to talk about pasture?
Sure. So we have several different grants that we have been working on, and we've put RFPs out for different programs to contractors to build and implement various programs. And so the pasture and surface water fencing program is one that I had worked on, and we have a contract submitted, and it's still being processed, so we don't have a signed contract yet. But that program is going to be working with farmers who aren't necessarily eligible for the CREP program, the federal program that Nina was talking about. And that's going to be working with them to do things to manage their pasture in such a way that will improve water quality, and also potentially fund exclusion fencing from waterways if that tends to be what the contractors think is the best scenario. Overall, looking at either existing water quality concerns or what we see as what might end up being a severe potential water quality concern in a pasture, and addressing those.
The grass waterway and filter strip program is in legislation as a critical source area seeding. I might be losing my voice, sorry. So this was another program we rolled out this year through the agency. So it incentivizes farmers to take land out of production to install grass waterways, filter strips, and or critical source area seeding. Do you guys know what a grass waterway is? Yeah, so if you have a swale in the middle of a crop field, it might be more prone to erosion, it might be prone to sheet flow. You take that land out of production and put grass in as filtration. Since sad, I'm losing my voice now, but more importantly, the Ag Clean Water Initiative program is a huge funding source for partners. The first round happened last year in 2017. 49 separate projects were funded.
It is unfortunate. Nita has been working very hard on both the CEEP and the clean water, the CWIP funds.
So last year, CWIP, we funded education outreach, organizational development, as well as innovative phosphorus reduction activities. We've widened the scope of this grant funding this year. The RFP is currently open. Applications are due January 10th. And we're looking for larger programmatic proposals. The implementation of the RFPs, as we've mentioned, requires a huge amount of education. And we do not have the capacity as the agency to do that alone. We definitely rely on our partners to help assist in that. Another big thing is the majority of folks that we're working with are private landowners. So there can be sometimes hesitant towards working with folks at the state. So we rely on local watershed groups, farmer organizations, the conservation districts, as well as UVM Extension, to really form that relationship with a farmer to the point where they understand, they feel comfortable, and engaging in that conversation about what they need to do to bring their farm into compliance. This year, some examples of some really successful grant programs that we've had. The Custom Applicator Program was funded through UVM Extension through the Clean Water Initiative grants. Missisquoi River Basin Association has an AmeriCorps position that's funded through these grants. Have you guys heard of GoCrop? It's an online application farmers can use to help manage nutrients. It's not their nutrient management plan. It's a way of making it a little bit more user-friendly. So a nutrient management plan is normally a big binder with a lot of papers, and a farmer is not always, as likely to flip through every single page as they would be if it's in an easy-to-use application on their phone, mobile device, and or computer. So we've seen huge success with that, especially with small farms. Some other examples are the conservation districts. We have a big grant with the Natural Resource Conservation Council to sub-grant conservation districts across the state to do education and outreach, kitchen table talks, like bringing it down to a local level, and talking about the needs of that community as far as, what kind of soils are we working with, like what are our big issues and what do we need to work on, or what are we missing, We definitely rely on folks to let us know like what's going on in each little piece of the state. I'm going to hand it over to you.
So one area of the REPs that changed was inspections for MFO. So that changed from 5 years to 3 years, and that also established a fee for MFOs. Also for the MFOs, they're all covered under one general permit in the state, and that is different. Large farms all have an individual permit, and all certified small farms individually certify per farm. So the MFO permit was established by the MFO rule, which was enacted in 2006. And so per the statute, it must be updated every 5 years. And so the first general permit was issued in 2007, and it was amended in 2012. And so now, 2017, we have embarked upon the 2017 revision. And so that process, as it stands now, had a public comment period and a public hearing. And so the public comment period started on October 2nd and concluded on December 1st. And then we had our public hearing on November 2nd. So At this point in time, where we've received a handful of comments that we are taking into account and amending the permits and considering, and we will formulate a responsiveness summary and post that in addition to the final permit once we get to that point in time. So changes to the general permit aren't substantial. There's definitely, it looks a lot different. It's much shorter because we removed redundant language that was already covered by the 590 standard and covered by the RAP. So it's a much shorter document, which is nice. There are some important changes, even if they don't look large, but the importation of substrates. So non-sewage waste and solid waste for farmers, importing that when they're not creating it on their farm. There's different components of how farmers are submitting parts of their NMP, so electronic submittal of shape files. We removed the the ability to transfer MFO permits. Instead, a farmer would terminate their permit and then if they sold the farm, that new person would reapply. As I said, inspections for MFOs are now every 3 years, and they do have an annual fee that they must submit with their annual report by April 30th every year. Overall, we just try to improve the clarity of the language as much as you can in any permit. So it still is a bit complex, and these are all the changes we made to the draft, and we're still discussing and trying to finalize that. Another thing that the agency has been focusing on and is starting to ramp up a little bit is taking a look at the large farm rule. And so that any kind of rule change is going to be a significant, lengthy process. And so we've started working on a pivot lean process for just overviewing the LFO rule in its entirety right now and really trying to identify all the different components of it and how it functions, and trying to see if those are the most efficient ways that those processes can happen. Are there things that we should reorganize or that we're missing? And so we've just sat down and started to have those discussions. And so this was something that's going to continue over the next year or so. As I said, many steps to a rule revision. And large farms also have a fee and an annual report they must submit annually by February 15th. So another topic covered by the RAPs when they first came out in 2015 or 2016, was rulemaking concerning subsurface tile drains. And so just to briefly give an outline of tile drains, they're different. This image actually describes it pretty well. There's different materials that are installed under a field for crops, and it helps drain fields that tend to be really saturated with water. And it's a really important tool for farmers. It can significantly increase crop yields. That being said, there's a lot of discussion on how tile drains contribute to the degradation of water quality in the state. And so we have, and there has been a lot of ongoing research regarding those issues. And so right now we have another RFP that's been sent out, and we have a couple contractors lined up. We're just waiting for that contract to get finalized. And that contract and this sampling program is something where the sampling should be starting up in this December, and then hopefully will continue on for a long time, depending on availability of funding. But that's going to be looking at around 40 sites, hopefully more, 40 different outlets for tiles, and taking sampling from those areas. And that within this study, the sources of the samples are anonymous to the agency. So our partners that we've contracted with will be going out and collecting this information and then submitting the aggregated data to us to analyze. And so we really feel like this is a way for us to get meaningful data that we really are desiring to have right now. This is a time that we really need to understand how tiles are impacting our waters. And so as of now, we are planning to pre-file in January of 2018 to create a new section of the RAPs that will be focused on tile drains. And that's something we're starting the process of, again, that is has quite a few steps associated with it, but it's something that per statute we're required to do, and at this point in time that is the steps that we are taking to address that.
Kaitlin, one question from Danielle Ozarski. Will the tile drain report submitted by the consultants be made available to the public?
So the reports that will be submitted by the contractors those reports will not be made public because they're not going to be, the data isn't going to be written up in a nice detailed report. It's just going to be aggregated data that's sent to us. And so once we have that data, we will be compiling it and making that available in a way that is appropriate for us. I mean, we plan to do this for as many years as possible to really get a clear idea of what the information or what the nutrients are that are existing within the tiles. But the information coming from the contractors will not be made public right away.
Thanks.
So that is a lot of information in a lot of different areas covered in a very short amount of time. So we welcome any questions, and our contact information is available. So you can feel free to call us or email at any time with any additional questions.
Just make a plug. This is a summary document we developed for farmers. It summarizes some of the major requirements per the RAPs, farm threshold sizes, and includes some really great infographics about setbacks and distances. So if you want to learn about what's in the RAPs, this is a great document, and there are section references so you can reference the actual rule. Second plug. If you don't read AgriView, if you don't subscribe to AgriView, you can go on our website and subscribe. That is a way we message to farmers. We have over 5,000 subscribers that get that paper every month. We use it to get messages around what's going on in the ag world, reminders around water quality regulations, and more.
Any questions for Nina or Kaitlin, either in the room or online?
I guess I would just make a comment that it might be beneficial to acknowledge that there were the AAPs before they were the RAPs.
Yes.
Because I think, in the report someplace, because I think there is this perception out there that,
That there was nothing before.
there was nothing. There was nothing.
To be
for
honest,
anybody, and I think
that the RAPs, the name change in itself kind of gives it away, like from the accepted ag practices to the required ag practices. The MFO and the LFO programs were launched years ago, and people were very aware of them, and MFO and LFO operators were. But if you ask other farmers, they were not all on board and understood to the full extent that AAPs were subject to all farms. So that's definitely something that's been going on. That's why the RAP rulemaking process was so long, to increase awareness that it was happening and that people needed to pay attention. So, but thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I just think it would be just a good acknowledgement that yes, the AAPs were around for a long time. Even though it was accepted, they were required for anyone that was moving nutrients or soil.
Yeah, and the transition from the AAPs to the RAPs, it's come with a lot of resources, increase in staff capacity, and increased funding for partners and for farmers. And that's been huge to our successes at the agency.
Probably the greatest change is just increased in available resources via manpower and womanpower to be out there and talking to folks.
You were talking about the certified small farm